This is a calculator problem from 2009 on the actual AP test. So I'm going to go through this question with you, and then when I go over the answers, I'm also going to talk about the rubric. Since this was an actual question that was used, I can tell you for sure how many points each section would be worth and what you would have to do to earn those points. The reason I picked this question was because it had the lowest average in the entire year 2009. The national average on this question was 1.92. So as we go through this and you try to do it on your own and check or kind of listen through it, if you could get 2 points or more, you're already doing better than national average. I think what made this problem such a low average is because of the way it's worded. It takes a little while to kind of digest what's going on and what you actually have to do. Once you get started with it, it's not a difficult problem, but the initial read-through can be a little bit strange. So we have this cable company, and we're manufacturing a cable, and the cable sells for $120 for every meter it is long. And for a cable of fixed length, the cost of producing the cable would vary according to the distance. And they actually give you that equation. So they tell you in the next line that to produce a cable that is X meters from the beginning of the cable, it uses the equation 6 radical X dollars per meter. So that's the rate, that's the cost per meter of producing this cable. And then it gives you just a little side note that when you're talking about profit, because a couple of the problems deal with profit, it is the difference between how much you get for selling the cable and then the actual cost of producing the cable, which makes sense. It's how much you get for it minus how much it costs to actually produce it. So Part A. Part A wants to know the profit that you would get on the sale of a 25-meter cable. Part A is going to be worth 2 points. So I'm going to go through that. If you want to pause it and try it on your own, I'm going to go through right now how you get Part A, how you get the 2 points. So if you want to find the profit on the sale of a cable, my profit, and I kind of wrote it as an equation, is going to be $120 times however long it is. So that's how much that you sell it for. So you get $120 for every meter that this cable is in length. And then minus the integral from 0 to 25 of the equation that we use to find the cost. Because we are going to integrate the rate of the cost. It's 6 radical X dollars per meter. If I integrate that from 0 to 25, that is the length of my cable, that will tell me how much it costs to produce this particular cable. So I'm going to put in 25 for X, so I have 120 times 25. And then I'm going to do this on my calculator. So I'm going to go on my calculator, use the FNINT button. I set it up, but I'm not going to take the time to integrate it by hand. You definitely could integrate it by hand, but you're not going to take that kind of time. You end up getting 500 when you integrate this on your calculator. So you end up with 3,000 minus 500, which gives me a total profit of $2,500. And your unit is just dollars because it is a profit. It is an amount of money that you made. On this particular part on the AP test, it was worth 2 points. You get 1 point for setting up an integral, for realizing that you need to integrate from 0 to 25 of 6 radical X. And then you get 1 point for the final answer of $500. And you do have to have the dollars, the unit, which obviously should be something that we put automatically. Part B. Part B says, using the correct units, explain what the integral from 25 to 30 actually represents. So when I did this problem, I actually found that answer because I wanted to kind of see what the number was before I answered it. You do not have to find the actual amount of it. I just did because I figured it would help me. So I put it in my calculator, used the FNINT button, and got $157.27, and then try to figure out, what does this mean? What this means is it's the increase in cost between making a 25-meter cable and a 30-meter cable. And the way that they put it on the rubric is they just said that this is going to be the difference in cost of producing a 25-meter cable and a 30-meter cable. I wrote, when I did this one before I looked at the rubric, I said that that's how much the cost would increase if you're producing a 30-meter cable as opposed to a 25-meter cable. And again, you don't have to have the number amount because they actually didn't want the answer. They just wanted you to explain what's happening. So using correct units, it's the dollars is the correct unit. It's the dollars that you would cost more to make a 30-meter cable than a 25-meter cable. This particular part on the rubric was only 1 point. You got 1 point for having your answer and your unit realizing that you're dealing in dollars. It's not like dollars per item or per meter or anything like that. It's actually just a dollar difference that you're working with. So you can say it anyway, that it's how much the cost is increasing between those two cable lengths, or the difference between the two cable lengths in dollars. Part C. Part C wants an expression using an integral that represents the profit on the sale of a cable that is X meters long. So here's where the problem starts to become more generic. So when I'm looking at my profit, I'm writing my profit equation. I called it P of K. My profit is going to be $120 times the length, which they're referring to K, so I'm going to use the K. So that's how much you're selling it for, $120 for every meter of length of this cable. And then minus the amount that how much it costs, and so the cost is going to be from 0 to K of 6 radical X dx. This particular part, and that's actually all you had to do for this part C, was worth 2 points. 1 point for writing it with the correct integral notation, and 1 point for the full expression. So the idea that you're taking the amount that you get selling, which is 120K, and you're subtracting the integral of your cost function. So I think that one is pretty straightforward, 2 points. I think a reason a lot of students did so poorly on it is because they were so confused with the beginning stuff that by the time they got to C, they weren't even sure where to start. So kind of looking at this a little bit at a time and not trying to get bogged down by all the words would make part C pretty easy. And then part D, to me, was the most involved. It's also worth the most amount of points. There are 4 points that you can earn in Part D. Part D wanted to know the maximum profit that the cable company could earn on the sale of one cable. So what I did on Part D is I went back to the equation that I just wrote for Part C. I kind of rewrote it because I wanted to see it again. My profit equation, and I'm being generic using K because they don't tell me in this how long the cable should be. And what I know about finding a maximum or finding a minimum is I need to find when the derivative equals 0. I need to find the critical value. So the next thing that I wrote is that P prime of K would equal 120 minus, now I'm taking the derivative of an integral. So the derivative of an integral cancel out. What's going to happen is the K is going to take the place of the X. So I get minus 6 radical K. And I need to know when that equals 0 because I want to find the critical value. I want to find the place where you could potentially have this maximum. So I could do this with a calculator, but at this point this was pretty easy to do by hand. I added the 6 radical K to the other side. I divided by 6, squared both sides, and I got K to be 400. You do not have to show any of the work there because it is a calculator section. On their rubric, all they said is if you got K equals 400 without showing any work, you automatically would get a point. You also get a point for showing that you need the derivative to equal 0. So the first derivative line that I wrote, the P prime of K, that gets you a point as well. Recognizing that you have to derive it and set it equal to 0, that's 1 point. Getting, actually finding that K value equals 400, that's the second point. Now we need to see if it's really a maximum, and there's a lot of ways you could go about doing this. I thought the fastest way was to do a second derivative test. They didn't mention that in the rubric, but to me it was a little simpler than they talked about looking at how many, there was only one critical value and looking at different things. To me, second derivative test was pretty easy. My second derivative test, when I'm taking the derivative of this is negative 6K to the 1/2, so I did a power out front, negative 3, power 1 less. I get negative 3 over the square root of K. When I put 400 in, negative 3 over the square root of 400, I get a negative number. So all I wrote is by the second derivative test. K equals 400 represents a maximum. What I saw in their rubric is they said that since it's the only critical value that exists, then it would need to be a maximum. I think just to be safe, it was nicer to say for sure that it actually is a maximum. That's the third point, is some way justifying that it is a maximum. You could also look at what's happening before and after 400. You could look at what's happening to the derivative right before 400, what's happening to the derivative right after 400. That would be showing that it goes from increasing, you have a positive derivative, and then you have a negative derivative. So that's another way you could get that point. There's a lot of ways to get that justification point, but you need something. You need to make some sort of statement. And then the last point is actually giving the profit, because if you read the question, it wants the maximum profit. All we found was the K, which was the length. I want to know how much money we're going to make from a cable that is 400 in length. And the way that I do that is I use that first equation, this one that's right here, and actually plug 400 in. So I get 120 times 400 minus the integral from 0 to 400 of 6 radical x. 120 times 400 is 48,000. And again, it's the calculator problem, so you're doing a lot of this on your calculator. The integral from 0 to 400, you're using your calculator to get that. You get 32,000. And when you subtract, you get a profit of $16,000. You do not need to show a lot of work for this. What they said to get that fourth point is that you just had to say that your maximum K value gives you a profit of $16,000. So you would not have to spend a lot of time setting it up. You would use your calculator to get that. So again, to kind of recap, Part A was worth 2 points, giving the integral setup and then the answer setup. Part B was worth 1 point. You are just explaining what that difference means. You do not have to give the actual number. Part C was worth 2 points, 1 point for setting up an integral and 1 point for writing it as an expression of your selling amount minus the integral to get the cost. And then this part that we're just looking at was worth 4 points. 1 point for saying that the derivative equaled 0 and actually writing what P prime of K looks like. 1 point for figuring out that K then has to be 400. 1 point for telling me why it really is a maximum, justifying it in one of many ways. And then 1 point for giving the actual answer of a profit of $16,000. Again, the national average was 1.92, which is incredibly low, the lowest of all 6 questions in 2009. But it shows you how if you can even pull 2, 3, 4 points on this, you're doing a lot better than the rest of the country in this test.